The if-else statement allows us to choose between two actions. The general form is the reserved word if, and then a condition, one of these relational expressions, and then an action, which I'll call action 1, and then the reserved word else, and then another action that I'll call action 2. The way it works is we start with the condition, we get a value out of the condition. If the value of the condition is true, then we execute all of the statements in action 1, and that's it, we're done. Don't even look at the rest of it. On the other hand, if the value of the condition is false, then we execute all of the statements in action 2. So we are choosing which one of these actions gets executed. Only one of the actions will be executed, either action 1 or action 2. Which one depends on the value of the condition. If we want to choose from more than two actions, one way we can do this is to use what's called a nested if-else statement. So a nested if-else statement means that inside the action of either the if part or the else part, we'll call that the if clause or the else clause, we have another if or if-else statement. Since an action can include any valid statement, the action could include another if or if-else statement. So here's an example in which we have condition 1, I'll call it. So if condition 1 is true, then we execute action 1 and we're done. We skip over the rest of this entirely. But if we get to the else, that means the condition 1 was false. So then we're going to check another condition. If condition 2 is true, then we execute action 2, and now we're done. We don't look at the rest of it. But if we get to the else, that means neither condition 1 nor condition 2 were true. So we're going to check another condition. If condition 3 is true, we're going to execute action 3, etc. You can have as many of these as you want to until you get down to what we'll call the nth action. So the nth action basically is none of the above. So if none of the above conditions are true, we're going to execute action n. Notice how this is all indented, so the if, the else, and the end are all indented to the same level, so it's kind of easy to see what's being executed. But still, with all this indentation, if you have a lot of them, it can actually get a little bit annoying. MATLAB has an else if clause, which shortens the code, cuts down on the number of ends if we're choosing from a bunch of conditions. So as with the nested if before, we can say if condition 1, so if that condition is true, we execute action 1, and that's it, we're done, don't even look at the rest of it. But then we can have an else, and instead of a completely separate if statement, we have an else if clause. Else, if condition 2 is true, then we execute action 2 when we're done. Else, if we get down here, we know condition 1 was false, we know condition 2 was false, so we're going to check and see if condition 3 is true. If it is, then we execute action 3, and if it isn't, we keep going. So again, we can have as many of these as you want, and the else action n basically is the none of the above case. So if none of the above conditions were true, we're going to execute the last action. So notice that we only have one level of indentation, we only have one end statement at the end of this entire if-else statement. We can also use the switch statement frequently instead of an if-else statement or a nested if-else statement in order to choose from several actions. So the switch statement has the general form of the reserved word switch. Then we have a switch expression, which is usually just going to be the name of a variable. And what we're doing is we're taking this variable and we're comparing to the values that are on these things called case labels to see whether the variable is equal to any of these values. So basically it goes through in sequence, starts with the variable, compares to see if it's equal to case expression 1. If it is, then it executes action 1, and that's it, done. Don't even look at the rest of it. But if the variable is not equal to the first expression, then we look at the value on the next case label and see if it's equal to that one. If it is, then we execute that action and we're done. So again, it takes a variable, compares to see if it's equal to the values on the case labels. If it finds a match, then it executes that particular action. Otherwise, we get down to what's called an otherwise clause. So an otherwise is none of the above. So if the value of the variable is not case expression 1 or 2 or 3 or etc., then we execute the nth action. So notice that the switch statement is used when we're comparing the switch expression to see if it's equal to the values on the case labels, and the otherwise clause handles all of the other possible values. So notice that this is equality only. If we wanted to take the variable in the switch expression and see if it's less than values, for example, then we can't use the switch statement. We'd have to use a nested if-else. So the switch statement is used when we're taking a variable, comparing to see if it's equal to a bunch of different values. The menu function is a really nice function in MATLAB. It brings up a little figure window that has a menu of push buttons, and you can put strings on the push buttons. And then when the user pushes a button, it returns an integer equivalent. So the first button is 1, the second button is 2, etc. Or if the user clicks on the red X and just closes the menu figure window instead of actually choosing one of the buttons, the menu function returns 0. So the menu function, it returns 0 if the user doesn't choose any button, or 1 if they choose the first button, 2 if they push the second button, etc. So the menu function returns an integer corresponding to the actual push button. Once you have that, you generally use either a switch statement to see what the value was equal to, or a nested if-else statement to perform different actions based on whichever button the user chose from the menu function. So again, the menu function is used generally in conjunction with a nested if or a switch statement.